chain flows. Near's the one we're close to, won't stop us now. Together we'll redefine the game. With near we'll fan the flame. Empowered minds rise and soar. Use your own AI, we'll explore. Help the future hand in hand in this tech-driven wonder.
Hello. Welcome to another office hours. We have very special guests from the far, and they're trying to be more near. And so there's going to be a lot of puns on this. I'm sorry from the start. But yeah, I mean, great to have you guys here. I'll let you guys introduce yourself, and we can dive in a bunch of topics we have.
Yeah, thanks. I have to say that the pun hadn't really occurred to me, but perfect pairing. So I'm Adam. I'm the founder and CEO of AI. We were set up a couple of years ago. We're a research nonprofit focused on AI safety, both doing in-house research and also education, generally helping support the field. And Ben, do you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm Ben. Great to virtually meet everybody on the stream, I suppose. I'm a director here at FAR AI, focusing on supporting the broader research community around AI safety, particularly in the Bay Area, but also around the world. So great to be connected.
And we have obviously me and Alex here joining from the near side let's dive into this. Well, I guess, the general topic to ask is how do you define AI safety? And I guess to dive in a little bit more, why you set up FAR? Maybe why is it FAR? It should be near.
It should be near. Well, no, we wanted to leave that for you guys. But I think it's a great question. Like, what is AI safety? I tend to conceptualize it as fairly broad, that AI is likely to be one of the most transformative technologies we have this century. And so there's just a whole host of things that need to happen to make sure that's really beneficial for society. And I'm, relatively speaking, I'd say an optimist. I think there's a huge amount of benefits from AI, but technology doesn't necessarily just go well by default. It goes well because we make a concerted effort to mitigate the risks, take advantage of the benefits. And so I think that there's both some really key technical problems in AI safety, making sure that AI systems actually do what designers intend. So that's sort of an alignment problem. Make sure that they do so reliably. So that's robustness. They don't fail in weird edge cases. They're not exploitable by adversaries, which current AI systems trivially are with jailbreaks. And then there's also the broader socio-technical problem of, aligned to Hughes values. So I think that there's, this is something where probably quite near to your hearts, right? Do we want to make sure that the power is decentralized? Everyone has access to AI. Do we want to do some kind of preference aggregation so we can make sure that the AI systems are being built reflect a large number of different people's preferences? And I think there's lots of different potential answers to this question. People have barely explored it. But right now, you've got a handful of AI systems being developed by a really small number of players. And that's problematic just from an unusual concentration of power aspect of things. So I would say AI safety is all of those things, although in order to actually make progress, and of course you want to scope it down and focus on one of the sub problems on AI safety. I'm not going to say I'm going to solve all of those. Absolutely not. And Ben, do you have anything you want to add to the definition of AI safety? You can also, you can share a little bit about why FAR was set up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's spot on. I often conceptualize it as having like two main components. Like the first is something like, can we have the AI do what we want it to do? This often like encompasses traditional ideas of safety. And then something that feels more like alignment or ethics, like does the AI reflect the values, whatever that means, of like the broader society, and like have we built it in a way that is doing the kind of preference aggregation, that's doing the type of like broadly not concentrated power, the kinds of goals that exactly as Adam said, I expect NIR cares about, like what is the design process for this AI. So like the first maybe focusing more on a lot of the technical aspects, but the second looking at like broader society and its involvement in the AI design and development process. And yeah, again, echoing what Adam said, like this is a broad problem, especially when we include that second bucket when we think about society writ large. And FAR is a growing organization, but we're not going to grow so big that we can tackle all of that. It's one of the reasons why we're really excited to do more field building, more outreach, to be able to build strong research collaborations so that we have many shots on goal, so to speak.
Yeah. So one quick aside is that for quite a while, since way before ChatGPT, I was an AI doomer, and it's not very it's not a popular thing to be these days. It's all about effective acceleration. Doomers are being frowned upon, but I'm still a very big doomer. I think we the risk of AI are pretty high, and they kind of outweigh in many ways the potential benefits. And when I think about AI safety, for me, the bigger question has always been, can we at all, and if we can, then what should we do, defend against adversarial players who are not, who intentionally are not building safe AI, right? So like it's one thing to do, like, what Anthropic does effectively, hey, let's build the most safe AI system ourselves, right? Let's Claude be, unabusable, etc., and let's do a lot of research to interpret what he's doing, and whatnot, right? And it's another thing to say, hey, there's this, Russian hackers in the basement with the 10,000 H100s building a rogue AI, which is about to, to launch North Korea-produced missiles into whatever, right? So I wonder if this is something you look into at all, or if you have like any thoughts about how we can. Is there anything we should /can/must do to prevent rogue players who intentionally build unsafe AI, or if this is completely out of scope for you?
No, I mean, I think this is very much in scope, although it's not going to be something that we can solve single-handedly. I think it's in large part a governance problem, and we can advise people on the governance side. But, we're not a policy organization, but I think there's a lot of technical research that you can do that make a lot of these governance methods more tractable, and also just have a less sort of stark trade-off. Because what I don't want to do is sort of create an authoritarian state to stop the rogue AI, right? Like that's a problem in its own right as well. But the good news is right now AI models do require substantial compute resources to train. So 10,000 H100s in a basement. I mean, it'd have to be a pretty big basement with some really good air conditioning. So actually. It might be feasible to at least monitor that and tell if some country is building a big data center. So I do think that kind of compute governance approach, where anyone can do whatever they want on their laptop or a rack of servers, but you've got $100 million set of compute, maybe you need to register it, maybe you need to have someone go in and just check what you are running on that, and then you could build a bunch of tooling into the chips that would allow you to have some basic telemetry. So that isn't necessarily what code you're running, but just saying how much interconnect bandwidth is there between these chips. So if you say I've got $1 billion of GPUs, but it's just doing inference or fine tuning on an open source model, you could attach to that in a verifiable way without anyone needing to go in and look at any of your code or infrastructure, and then be able to distinguish between that versus a huge new training run, which might require more scrutiny. So I think there are some technical interventions you can do there, which aren't AI interventions. These are like cryptography, security, computer architecture, but like very tractable. We already have stuff like secure enclaves or confidential computing in some of the latest GPUs like H100s, but in theory could support a lot of these features. It just needs to be some software built on top of it, and then also making it actually robust to adversaries that have hardware access and are trying to tamper with this. But that's in theory tractable, or at least you could detect if that tampering has occurred with some kind of in-person audit. So I'm sort of an optimist in principle here, but I think it's going to require quite a lot of work to actually build that out, especially if we're talking about an international regime. Now, the other thing I'm worried about in terms of this is not actually necessarily rogue actors or rogue states training an AI system, because that's really expensive. Why do that when you can just steal it, right? I think this sort of model weight theft is underrated. And I was quite sort of entertained that Zuck's most recent letter for Llama 3 was basically saying, well, we don't think there's any downsides to open sourcing models, because if anyone wants to steal OpenAI's model, they just do it anyway. Which I thought was sort of like, a bit of a strange argument. It's kind of like saying, we're not going to even bother trying to protect your emails because people are just going to steal it anyway. We'll just put them all publicly, right? It's like, security is hard, but it is a solvable problem. But I think that, there's some truth to this point. But right now, I think if a nation state wanted to steal an AI model, we probably could. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done to shore that up as well. But it is a solvable problem. Like, big tech companies like Google have faced off against nation state adversaries in the past and been able to stay secure. So it just requires treating that with the same degree of sensitivity we would treat customer data.
I'll take the opposite kind of on all of this, because I think, I'm definitely anti-doomerism. Although I do think we do need to do a lot of things to make sure we have systems in place. But my point here is any of this, like, a bunch of hackers training a rogue model, like, that's not the problem. The problem is when they're actually going to use it. And they can use, you can use right now already ChatGPT to hack into software. Even with current all the protections, it still actually is pretty good at finding vulnerabilities in the code. And obviously, you can use open source models. So like that, to me, is not a problem at all. That I feel is we probably like it kind of distracts us from a real problem, which is like our systems are not designed, and by systems I don't mean AI systems. I mean our society systems not designed for the world where AIs are available. They haven't been designed even for social media, right? Like we see a pretty big cracks in society due to kind of social media creating this, very perturbed view, right? And people complaining about Google like results being biased, etc. Right? Like all of that is just examples of kind of our algorithms that run, everybody's social feed and search results are not designed for more and more content being pumped out, and like as AI is proliferating, like that is just gonna accelerate. But the misinformation, bias distraction, hackers in the basement existed before. Like you didn't need AI; you could just hire 1,000 people writing a bunch of stuff, right? So my point here is, like to me, it's not about like trying to protect, even H100s from running in some of these places, etc. And I'm actually a lot more with Zach that, yeah, like if people really want to get the weights, like they'll get the weights. It's not, hiring a private army to ascend onto OpenAI building. Please, nobody do that. But instead, it's really about how do we build systems. Like the government systems in US are all currently still working a lot on like paperwork and like physical signatures. There are still checks as physical signatures, right? Like if we have cryptography for 50 years plus, and we still have physical signature checks that people validating if this is a real thing. So
we use a language number to authenticate people.
Yeah, the number that doesn't rotate, that you tell everyone, from your bank to your employer, as a your private key, right? Like all of that is like there's a systematic problems in, I call it society operating system. And I feel when people are talking about AI safety, they should be talking more about this versus trying to kind of contain the AI research, which again leads to, I feel, very limiting like policy, as you said, right? Of like, hey, if you have 10,000 GPU H100s, now you need to record on that. And it's like, what if I have 10,000 FPGAs that I designed specifically for transformers? Do I report or not? Is that like fits into the, or like if I'm designing a new chip, now I need to register? Is like at which stage? When I tape out, when I design it, when it came to my mind, and I have this idea of beautiful chip that will run transformers at like 1,000x speed, or somebody comes up with a new model and like completely all of these parameters don't make any sense, and all those floating number points maybe don't make sense because somebody runs it on biochemistry, for example, substrate. So to me, that like it feels like we're zooming down onto a specific set of technology choices that right now showed like an interesting result, instead of like addressing the fundamental problem that our society kind of runs on. I mean, honestly, like pre-internet, a lot of it is pre-internet tech, some of it is internet tech, and we haven't really transitioned to what I call it post-AGI, society operating system. Like when we have AIs and AIs are everywhere and everybody can use them for good things and bad things, we need to have a system that can handle that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I end up just agreeing with quite a lot of that. So maybe I'm sort of somewhere in between, in that I think I see a lot of benefits from AI, and I've got something like 10% catastrophic risk this century from AI, which is enough to make me be really serious about it and want to try and work to make that number get lower. But also, in 90% of cases, I'm like, this is going to be awesome, and we shouldn't sort of strangle this awesome technology. But the reason I'm as low as 10% is because I think people are going to take these issues seriously and both try and shore up the rest of society and try and develop AI responsibly. I think if we just had people raise their head with just to build cool technology with sort of no thought of a bigger picture, then my catastrophic risk number would be a lot higher. But yeah, I think sort of our plan A, where possible, should be to sort of make society more resilient, including with AI. So right now, computer security is kind of a mess. Like you can get 0 days for iOS, Android for about $1 million. And the reason we don't see people just exploiting this all the time is more of economics of it. That, you're burning a 0 day for $1 million. It's going to get patched. How do you actually make money from this, right? But if you were, more of a nation state at first, or you just wanted to go after a particular target, you can do this, right? And that does happen. So it's very patchwork, and I think AI could really destabilize that and shift the offense-defense balance. But it could also shore it up because, you can use GPT-4 to detect vulnerabilities and do automatic attacks. That was an interesting paper by Daniel Kang's lab. But you can also do that in your pull request, right? You've got an automatic reviewer to find vulnerabilities and just improve the security. We might even be able to start actually generating formally verified code, because right now it's like that's possible. People have done 10,000 plus line microkernels that are formally verified. It's just really slow and expensive. You make programming so much cheaper with AI, we might actually be able to start doing this for more significant amounts of software. So I think there's, how do you start using this tooling to make society more resilient is a really key question. And my concern is just that we're not going to be able to move fast enough on that. And I think the checks is a good example. Like I was recently trying to get rent from one of my housemates, and like the fastest way for him to transfer it was to write a check in front of me and then I scan it with my mobile phone, because like there's no like mobile payment system, and it's just crazy, right? I mean, and yeah, like we have blockchain, but like you don't even need
you need to use blockchain
database, right? So society moves slowly, and I think we should be trying to make it move as quickly as possible. But if we have an option of saying, let's slow down certain proliferations of dangerous technology until we can put in place ways of making society more resilient, that would be great. But it's hard. But I wouldn't want a situation where we're going to like permanently cut off part of a technology tree. And I don't think it's feasible for exactly the reasons you're saying. Like, yeah, people are going to come up with some better AI architecture, right? Come up with FPGA that's faster than GPUs. As soon as you put in place regulation, people try and find ways around it. But I think it can be a way of buying time for other kinds of activities. And right now my worry is that we're just accelerating faster and faster at technology. We've got very good at rapidly making progress on that. We've not got better at like rapidly adapting our governance institutions. And I don't see that improving, unfortunately, in the short term. But I'd love to be proven wrong. And Ben, you've probably got plenty of thoughts.
Well, and I really agree with all this. And I feel like when I was hearing both like Alex and Illia you speak, it feels, I don't know, like maybe there's more agreement actually between y'all than there is like real disagreement. Like I always find like the split to be a bit of a false dichotomy. Like I suspect that a lot of AI safety solutions are actually like full stack or scalable solutions. The kind of things that should work on like addressing some amount of near-term risks probably are also going to be important for the broader doomer concerns. And I say that as somebody who has a fair bit higher probability on catastrophic risk from AI this century than does Adam, but I'm still like very excited about all the investments in near-term mitigations against AI misuse. I saw actually, I guess a few weeks ago, or I don't remember when, that y'all had Atlas Computing on your office hours as well. I think they're a great example of a group that's trying to apply these advances in AI to formal verification and addressing the kind of lack of robustness in our cyber physical infrastructure. And I think there's a couple initiatives like this that seem great, regardless of how much weight you put on longer term concerns from AI. I think just the other thing I'd like throw in there is I like want to kind of plus one the speed issue for cultural and societal responses to AI being one of the key issues. Like, yeah, if governance is operating at something like 2 to 5 year timeline for passing policy or mitigations to new developments in AI, I think that's just so much slower than what we'll actually need. That experiments in other forms of governments, like ones that like are going to be quicker, or like kind of empowering more actors to be able to do their own forms of like for instance, whether it's companies self-regulating, whether it's experiments in like quicker response cycles to AI developments, that seems incredibly important, because otherwise we are going to enter into this like situation where the OODA loop basically for capabilities is going to be spinning way faster than like society's response. And that I think leads to both like near-term misuse problems and to catastrophic risk.
Yeah, I also
I never know the format for these things, so I wanted to actually throw out a question to y'all, if that's all right. I'm kind of curious where, like, I was looking into the Near AI and the kind of like open source AI research agent, I think is how I'd term it, that y'all are like particularly interested in working on. I'm like kind of curious, given your respective views on like where AI is going, why, like, what's the rationale? What's the like the drive for building that?
So there's a I think one important consideration here is that we do believe in like effectively on the, if you like plot the whole spectrum of how accessible should the machine learning models be from perspective of having the safest sort of deployment of AI, you can be on the end of the spectrum saying, hey, it should be a prerogative of the very small number of entities that are heavily regulated, and that's something that I think OpenAI pushes very heavily for. Or you can be on the end of the spectrum saying, hey, everybody should have access to the largest models, to the weights, and we are heavily on the latter, right? So effectively, there is no trust in the small set of entities. I think historically, the small set of entities were always sort of heavily incentivized to optimize for themselves, not for the majority. And as of today, we're sort of in that regime, in the sense that there are very large models which are somewhat competitive with the proprietary model, right? So like Llama 405B is a very competent model. Maybe it is not as good on the benchmark as GPT-4 on some of them, but it is definitely usable in a very large set of cases where you would want to have a model, right? So you have, like if you're trying to build, like a long-term product and you don't want to depend on OpenAI API, or if you want to have a product where nobody can pull the rug underneath you or like ban you for violating some policies, etc. Right? You can use that. And the problem is that we do not have it is not a future-proof solution, in the sense that as of today, a while ago, there was at least 2 different companies consistently publishing such models, right? There was Mistral, and now suddenly Mistral, for some of their newer models, is changing the license, right? And there was stability, and stability did not age well with the open source efforts, right? And like we're slowly getting into the mode where the whole open source sort of model story is fully dependent on Facebook continuously publishing state-of-the-art models, right? And you don't want it to be the case, right? So you want to be in a state where if Facebook chooses not to do that anymore, there is someone who is ready to pick up the torch. And the way I usually outline it is that you have certain number of requirements. The requirement number one is that that entity needs to be sufficiently funded to be able to, to train the state-of-the-art model. It needs to have future-proof, like effectively, it needs to have incentives aligned in such a way that it will continuously do so, right? So far, like hypothetical Mistral instability, they did not have incentives aligned long-term, right? And so, and thirdly, it needs to have expertise. And from that perspective, Near is somewhat well-positioned to be there. But it doesn't make any sense for us to be training large language models today because, there do exist very large language models today that are competitive, and it would be a massive weight of resources. So our focus is in a somewhat different areas today, right? We invest much more heavily into like agentic infrastructure, private vector stores, etc.
Yeah, maybe to add kind of from this perspective of, the spectrum, that there's few entities that are controlling all of the intelligence toolings, right? And, potentially they're becoming more and more government-like because they have more and more capabilities. And as well, they're pretty much becoming a monopoly on some new type of power, which is, how people perceive reality through this interactions with AI, as as we see this happening already with Google and Facebook. And so we want to have an alternative, which is, that's why we call it user-owned. It's not just about open source, but actually it's about having a very different approach to kind of your value function, right? The global value function is where individuals and communities, like these models, are focused on their success versus on kind of profit or control of a specific company. And that requires a different approach, right? It requires also kind of, as Alex mentioned, like how do we design a system that's less about one company doing something or one organization, but actually how to like coordinate a whole ecosystem of different partners, so different agents, different researchers to really work together to kind of co-create that. And from a safety perspective, at least, my hypothesis here is that if everybody has access to state of the art or near state of the art AI tooling, then like any individual group, right, trying to use it for malicious purposes, right, you have a lot more people kind of on a side that's trying to protect this and can have access to very similar amount of kind of intelligence tooling and compute to be able to stop that. Versus if there's only like one or few companies that are able to do this, and one of them becomes malicious for whatever reason, be that internal reason or indeed a physical attack of a malicious state, and then they use this tooling that's only available, and like nobody else is able to use something of that order to protect kind of the system. That seems like a massive failure mode for the whole ecosystem and for the whole world. And so kind of distributing power have always been a way to really democratize something and allow everybody to kind of keep checks and balances, and as well as like that's potentially a way, to your point about governance moving slowly. If you have kind of AI tooling and you have some of this identity systems that blockchain provides, you potentially can have governance as well sped up, because now product wise you can actually embed governance directly into some of these agentic frameworks, right, where there's an agent on your behalf actually interacting with other agents to decide on some of the decisions.
Yeah, I'm interested in experiments there, and I'll just say, like, I really agree with something I think you were pointing out, which is like the way in which governance isn't just about like voting in the upcoming election. It's like also very much how companies and ecosystems of people end up governing the decisions that influence the products that are going to influence everyone. Like, I really like what Anthropic has experimented with, I think in partnering with the Collective Intelligence Project on their like constitutional AI like trying to aggregate more preferences to inform the underlying policy that the AI executes. Like, I'd love to see more experiments like this happening in the world, and it seems like it's the kind of thing you're pointing out with NEAR.
Yeah, just to add, I really like the emphasis of user-owned AI, because I think there's been a bit of a dichotomy sometimes between open weight and proprietary models. But unlike most open source software, where you can go in, you can tinker, you can fork it, you can change it. If someone just gives me a 405 billion parameter set of matrix weights, it's like, what do I do with this? I mean, I can fine tune it, but there's been a lot of recent research suggesting that actually, even if you do something like RL from human feedback or DPO, the pre-training process really restricts a set of preferences that are expressible after that fine-tuning. So if the model doesn't already have some representation of a value that's important to you, you're going to really struggle to fine-tune it back in later. So it's not like this is fully user-owned. I mean, it's more so than a proprietary model, but if Meta wanted to restrict things, or just has unintentionally, based on how they curated the data set, they still have a lot of influence here. So I think being able to at least understand those limitations, but also having more infrastructure where academic or open source collaborations can actually build those models. I'm actually a pretty big proponent of, at least right now, open weight AI models. We use them all the time in our research. I think there has to become a point where you say, well, you can't wash your hands of responsibility of what people do with your models if you make them available, whether it be behind an API or giving everyone access to the weights. But you also, by the same token, should be getting some benefit from the positive uses of those models. So if 100 people use them for something great to defend against bad actors, and 1% of people abuse it, if a net effects on society has been positive, we should still allow it. I just want to kind of at least be open to there being potentially some restrictions we do want to put in place on training and sort of irreversible proliferation of models. And I think that the good news is there are things you can do to mitigate some of these risks while still having open weight models. So I'm quite excited by the model unlearning literature, for example, where you're basically saying, okay, we can get rid of a particular set of dangerous capabilities or knowledge that a model has, while it's still being able to do everything else, basically the same as original model. So we could identify a particular subset of capabilities that maybe most people don't need to have direct access to, and then put more restrictions just on those. That could be one pathway forward. But I certainly don't think that just having a few AI companies have exclusive access to these models is a good path forward. I mean, if we think of something like nuclear power, where I think most people agree we shouldn't just say, okay, everyone can build a nuclear power plant in their backyard. The reason people aren't up in arms about the power these utility companies exert is they are a utility company. They sell to everyone equally. It's a commodity. You can't say we're not going to provide you with power because we don't like your political views or something like that. But right now, there's no similar protection for AI, right? Like, these companies can just write their terms of service. They can choose what views these AI models express. So maybe there's a need for something like net neutrality for AI if we're going to have this kind of monopoly. But I definitely don't know what the right combination here is. I think open weight models have a part to play in it, but I do expect both for sort of the governance aspect, but also just economic fundamentals, that proprietary models are probably going to be at least a generation ahead of open weight models for the foreseeable future.
So you don't believe in like a model competitive with GPT-5, but open source dropping anytime soon?
I mean, things move pretty quickly. Like, I wouldn't bet against it 2 or 3 years from now. I just think the proprietary models are going to have a 1 or 2 year lead. And then, the other interesting thing, right, is, I mean, Llama 3.145b, we started to play around with it, and it's pretty interesting from a research perspective, but it's hard to work with, right? Like, you can't just put it on, even a fairly beefy server. You've got to start sharding it across multiple GPUs, multiple nodes. So yeah, I mean, most people are going to be using these models behind an API. It might be an API served by a third party. you might be able to have free fine-tuning access for real enthusiasts can work with it. But I think the models getting bigger and bigger is still going to restrict the number of people who use it. Like, this isn't something you download 4 or 5p and run it on your laptop, right? So from that perspective, I think we're seeing the lines blurred between this kind of utility view of AI models and the sort of more proprietary model. And really, it's just a question of how much competition is there in those models being served, how restricted are the terms of use, do you have an ultimate recourse to build in-house infrastructure? I think there is a meaningful difference, but for most people, I just expect them to be interacting with these models behind API, whether open source.
But it's not mentioned that from many perspectives, Llama 405B behind an API is strictly superior to the proprietary model, because like the biggest risks, right? If you build a company and you build it around GPT-4, and then for any reason you get locked out, right? Like, you happen to be in a geography that becomes sanctioned, or you violate some policy, right? Then you're in a very bad state, right? Because as you switch to a different model, models are not drop-in replacements of each other, right? But if you use an API, like you use Firework, right? And then for some reason Fireworks limits your access, that's chill, right? You just go to together.ai, and that's exactly the same model, right? Maybe with a different pricing or speed, it doesn't matter, but your product has consistent experience, right? And in the worst case, like effectively, it allows you to heavily delay the time you will have to figure out how to self-host it, but you always have that option as well, right? So if all of them lock you out, right, you happen to be like an outlaw in the modern world.
We have already projects, right, like Hyperbolic, which are offering that kind of across different like decentralized providers, right, who themselves don't know where you're coming from and you pay in crypto, right? So you're kind of creating a marketplace of providers that is, similarly how it's done with crypto, don't really care where it's coming from and just provide this service. So to your point around like utility, the ultimate utility is when all of these providers are indeed just kind of commodity providers behind a shared API, and they can go offline, they can come in online, and they also don't care where the requests are coming from. And that is actually what blockchain is really good at, to facilitating.
Yeah,
so that only can work with obviously open weight models to facilitate.
Yeah, so I think you can commoditize the inference. The challenge is that in many cases, these models do actually need to be updated. They've got a fixed training window. So depending on your application, you may need to be continually fine-tuning them. Now, yeah, you can do that on an open weight model yourself, but it could be prohibitively expensive if you're trying to add a lot of additional information, like train them on all the latest news. So I think, to your point earlier, right now the open source ecosystem is pretty dependent on Matter, and they have a lot of influence there. So I think if you really wanted to make sure that there was sort of business continuity here, no single provider has lock-in, then you'd really want sort of a set of competing open weight model providers. And I don't know if I prefer to be, if I put myself in the shoes of someone building a startup on top of an AI model, I don't know if I'd prefer to be in a situation where I've got 3 proprietary providers whose models are not perfectly drop-in replaceable, but they're pretty similarly competitive. And I know if one of them locks me out, I can go on to the next, or be in a situation where I've got 100, competing inference providers, but I know that my model is going to go out of date in a year, and I don't know if there's going to be another model dropping anytime soon. So I think there's just a different risk profile depending on the time horizon you're looking for. But I definitely think there needs to be some degree of competition here. And the less competition there is, and the more important it is, there's some kind of monopoly protections in place, like net neutrality.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So effectively, you're saying you might prefer to have the risk of being locked out of proprietary API, but have the benefit of having the state-of-the-art performance going forward.
Yeah, and not if there was only a single proprietary provider, right? But if you say, well, I can use Claude, I can use GPT-4, I can use Gemini, then okay, if your business is really at sort of the edge of these terms of service, then maybe you are better off with open weight models. But I don't see many people worrying like, oh, what if I get locked out of Amazon Web Services and then also Google Cloud Platform? Like, it just doesn't really happen. I mean, these are companies that want to take your money. I think people do worry about like what happens if I get locked out of my personal Gmail account, because in that case you're not the customer, you're the product, you're not paying them money. But I don't think these companies are going to have a very good business model where they arbitrarily shut people's accounts. But yeah, I wouldn't want to be building a company where I'm wholly dependent on a single company. But if it's like a 3 companies, that's already a lot better. If it's 20 companies, it's actually pretty good. So I do think that we could potentially get into that ecosystem without too much trouble. I mean, we're also seeing things like Anthropic's partnering with AWS, and I think a lot of other cloud providers are interested in this to actually provide inference access to their models. That might also be another way around this, where you say, okay, there are these sort of specialized R&D companies, but they're not necessarily the ones that are doing the model inference.
Yeah, I just want to mention that there's definitely examples of different clouds shutting down people's accounts for no like apparent reason. But yeah, I mean, I think that this is indeed kind of a current state where people do prefer to use one of these APIs. Although I think actually more and more people are switching to open source, actually because it's just cheaper. Like you can customize the model in such a way to get like a cheaper same result or better result even for cheaper, because you can like modify it in a way that you want, which you cannot do. You cannot just go and like into 4.0 and like downgrade it to whatever 2.5.
Which I imagine is particularly important for folks in the near ecosystem who are doing agent experimentation. They're like tinkerers, the hobbyists, all the developers who are like working on like new agents. I imagine that being able to do that kind of fine tuning is particularly important. It would be my.
I mean, that's a big part, and especially for any research that's outside of those 3 big labs. But I'm also talking about like a larger scale consumer or developer productivity apps, which have a really big load. Let's say you have a code completion, like Cursor or one of those plugins. You actually don't want to use GPT-4o all the time. It's extremely expensive, and you actually don't need that. What you need is like customized, coding model that's, probably like 7B or 12B size. That's way faster and way cheaper. And that's kind of been, I think, a big use case as well, just kind of going down to specialized models. And I think that's where a lot of the open source research is moving, is like, how do we specialize models better? And I mean, agents is part of that specialization. Like, how do you build a set of software around the model that potentially uses tools, etc., that specializes in specific set of skills versus being this generic I can do anything system.
Yeah, I do feel pretty excited by that sort of specialized AI development. I mean, I think there's 2 development pathways you can take to try and make an AI system better. You can actually say, what problem am I trying to solve? Let me train it on that problem. Let me provide adequate scaffolding for it. Like, let me actually really, when we say we train AI systems, let's actually train the AI system on this task. And the other is to just say, let's stack more layers, right? Let's throw more GPUs at it. And right now, a lot of the AI companies are primarily focused on the second development pathway. That wasn't true 5 years ago, but it really has been true in recent years. And you can sort of see why, because it's a very easy way of turning venture capital dollars into a more capable product, whereas it requires a lot of domain-specific knowledge to start specializing your model to be good at coding, good as a healthcare assistant. But I think at some point it's going to become both economically more viable to build these specialized models, because we're seeing AI compute investment has vastly grown faster than Moore's law, right? Like it's not that the hardware has gotten that much better, it's that people are now spending billions of dollars on these training runs, and it's some you can't go that much further before it starts becoming an appreciable fraction of world GDP. And at that point, it's going to become hard to scale much further. So it's going to be sort of, I think, an economic imperative. But I think it's also actually quite good from a safety standpoint and a user ownership standpoint. If you do have these specialized models, if you have this model that does everything, then the sort of the risk surface area is huge, right? It could do all sorts of misbehave in all sorts of ways. How are we going to test that? You've got this one company or handful of companies with a lot of power over it. Whereas if you say, okay, this model does this one task, maybe I don't even care about the political views of coding assistant developers, right? It doesn't come up very often. And if I do want my summarization of what's going on in the news, then I care a lot about the political leanings. But the good news is, okay, there's a left-wing one, there's a libertarian one, there's a Marxist one. I can get these different perspectives. So I think that kind of ecosystem is a lot healthier. And to the governance question, we kind of know how to govern ecosystems of specialized actors, because that's just like companies. That's individuals that have been trained. What we don't know how to do is govern sort of millions of individuals that are much faster than us, which could be what a general purpose AI system could look like. That sort of we're just like plants to it because it can act so much faster, even if it's not any more capable than us. And that would pose a lot more challenges. But I think we can get many of the benefits of AI without going down that technology pathway, at least in the short term.
Strongly agree. And also, I just really love the idea, which I hadn't thought of, that maybe GitHub Copilot has radical anarcho-communist views, but I just never get to see it because it's coding or it's
just put a comment in and ask it,
/ please complete this political phrase.
It's all in variable names.
Yeah. You start noticing it in the variable names and start sneaking it in there.
Yeah, I mean, subconsciously your worldviews, change a little bit at a time, but over the course of a year. I also go ahead, Illia.
No, go.
Yeah. No, I was also interested in. You mentioned briefly in passing that you have your own internal efforts, but then you support a wider ecosystem of projects. I'm curious, what things are you supporting? In which areas, and if there are examples of cool projects you think that are doing some cool research on the safety side that you would want to highlight.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, just to zoom out a little bit, the overall vision as far as to incubate and accelerate new research directions in AI safety, because we don't think that the current bets that, let's say, the handful of major AI companies are pursuing are sufficient to guarantee safety, even putting aside these sort of, these social and governance issues. And interestingly, I think most people working in those companies kind of agree, at least if you ask them in private. They're like, yeah, I mean, we're just doing the bare minimum. We don't know how to actually make these systems reliably aligned. And then, you see academia pursuing a wider range of directions, but it's really hard for most academic groups to really make a serious dent in these problems because it's so compute and engineering intensive. So we're trying to work in this middle ground of having a diverse portfolio of different bets operating on medium scale research. Lets you go from an idea to an actual viable prototype that can then either be used as a technology demonstration to get AI companies to scale this up and build it, or go to governments and say, look, this is possible. So you need to be asking for better. Don't let people say this isn't possible. We did it on a shoestring budget relative to these companies. And then also just have a better understanding of these issues so that we can inform the research going on and the policy going on. So to the question of what are concrete projects that I'm excited by? Well, we've been doing a lot of events recently, bringing together machine learning researchers. One I want to highlight is the International Dialogues on AI Safety, because I think one of the big issues we see with governance is okay, great, maybe we have an excellent governance regime in the US. We don't, but maybe we could get there, right? Maybe we get the AI companies pretty on board. We've got, a great government agency. We have some actual legislation. There's no legislation now. There's just an executive order. I could kind of see this happening. But what about the rest of the world? What about, the hackers in 10,000 H100s in that huge basement data center? And And so I think we do need international cooperation, but the good news here is that I think there's an emerging scientific consensus. And although it's going to be hard to get people to see eye to eye in terms of how to use AI systems, at least we can have a consensus of like, no one wants to build a system that's going to blow themselves up, right? And so we've seen cooperation in the past on things like nuclear safety that, yeah, we'd rather some other nations not have nuclear weapons, but if they're going to have it, we'd really rather that they not be insecure so that terrorists can use it. And so the US actually has a standing policy. If a nuclear armed nation can ask the US for assistance in securing their nuclear weapons, and the US will share its technology in that area. So I think that we could hopefully get to a similar area where there's some, even if geopolitical tensions rise, we can get some areas of safety research carved out and protected. And so we've been very excited to, at these international dialogues, have some very senior Chinese, European, Canadian, UK, US scientists and policymakers, all really put some pretty strongly worded statements out calling for global action on these issues, such as red lines in AI development, like being able to conduct automatic cyber attacks or be able to assist in chemical, biological, nuclear weapon development, that if crossed would require action by domestic regulators. So, to be clear, these statements, they don't have any legislative force, right? But this kind of track 2 diplomacy lets us pave the way for track 1 diplomacy, like actual diplomats, to start having these conversations, realizing that there is at least some scientific and institutional support in their respective nations for these kinds of topics. So that's just one project I'd really want to highlight. And then Ben, I mean, you also do a lot of work on incubating the fields, and maybe you want to share some of what's going on at Far Labs.
Yeah, I was also thinking of the International Dialogue on AI Safety, which I think just one of the coolest examples of the high impact events in field building that FAR has done in partnership with other groups. We also run a co-working space and research hub here in the Bay Area, where we bring in a number of groups to work from. I think that this is really good for the kind of idea exchange, the mutual support that often seems extremely important in research. So we've got a number of groups working out of here. It's hard to pick your favorite. It would be like, picking your favorite child. So I'm not going to name too many specific names, but I do. Maybe I'll say, one group that's been part of like the FAR ecosystem and FAR Labs since we started the FAR Labs group about like a year and a half ago now, MATS, matsprogram.org, I think is their address, does really great work bringing in new researchers into the field of AI safety. So they run cohorts for postdocs, for promising master students, that kind of type of people who are interested in like doing independent research or maybe joining a research lab in the future. They've run these kind of like semi-annual cohorts. And I don't know, I think that that's incredibly promising for doing the kind of like general field building that's important and really plays an important part in our ecosystem, because from there we can also start thinking about more of the projects and organizations that might grow out of this and support new bets. A few of them that also work from FAR Labs, like Timaeus is a great research group that's pursuing this I think relatively novel direction, this new paradigm for interpretability style research. A few others like that come to mind, like Simplex, which is doing this for computational mechanics. So yeah, I'm just really excited by what I see as the growth in researchers coming into the field of AI safety with their own paradigms and their own unique takes on how to solve some of the fundamental problems in AI safety. Because I suspect that a lot of those aren't going to work, but some of them might, and that kind of new paradigms is exactly what the field needs. So yeah, I named a few there. I feel like I could keep going on that, but I just say this kind of feels like maybe popping up for a moment. I was thinking about how one of the things FAR is excited about is probably the same thing you're excited about, why you're doing live streams like this in office hours. I was struck at some point by the way crypto and Web3 has these really formal methods for governance, but at the same time you join Discords or Slacks to have the important discussions and share context. I feel like this kind of like a split is also like a big part of like AI safety research, where like, yeah, you have a lot of papers and you have a lot of like formal experiments happening, but much of the context sharing that's crucial to people like actually knowing what's going on and coming to good ideas and orienting well happens through in-person conversations or on Slacks and Discords as well. So I don't know, I think FAR is trying to invest in the full stack of AI safety, which includes making good Discord conversations happen. I say Discord, we actually use Slack. I just feel like that was actually, I don't know if that was the right choice, but we go back and forth on it.
Yeah, I mean, both of them are not great for technical and kind of long form conversation. So
yeah, what's that XKCD? We need a new solution, and now there's 14 competing standards for online conversations.
There's a lot of Google Docs.
A lot of Google Docs, yeah. That's actually probably the main social network, is like being added to like various Google Docs for commenting.
I feel like the Google Wave was the beautiful solution for all this.
We can blame this on Google too. It was Wave and Reader that they shut down, and we would have been in a perfect utopia.
Exactly. So maybe just to conclude on kind of a positive side. So we have this blockchain community, right, listening to us. There's a lot of indeed governance tooling and experiments that exist. And so I'm actually curious if you guys have ideas on what interesting experiments that blockchain community can facilitate in governance, right, to help with what you guys are working on and maybe collaborate with some of the efforts that you have in the safety ecosystem.
I've got an idea, which I think is going to be maybe a bad idea, but it'll also I'll set up Adam's idea to sound better. But all right, so I was thinking about this because I saw that Near was partnering with Gauntlet for your like stake proposal.
Yep.
And I haven't followed Gauntlet too much recently, but like a year or two ago, or like 3 years ago, I was like pretty interested in them as an example of agent-based modeling in like an applied, like useful way. It's no knock against the ABM community. I just feel like most of their stuff is done in like ecology research. There aren't that many examples of being like used as much in like real world, like high stakes situations like governing Near. And I'm like, yeah, I'm really excited about directions of experiments that look like this, where I think that's like a prototype of what AI powered tools for thought will end up looking like. Like how much money, I actually just don't know this, but like a tremendous amount of money is now going to be governed by a proposal that was shaped by like AI tools for thought. And I'm like, okay, that seems like if it's happening in the crypto space, it's a good test bed for the kinds of like social mechanisms that maybe can get adopted by society at large to make it more robust. And if like crypto is this almost like experimental area for like the kinds of things that could happen in the rest of the world, that seems like a great role to play and like really important and highly leveraged. So I'm excited about more experiments of like using AI to help, AI for wisdom, AI for epistemics, like using that to help make better decisions about how to govern communities, especially ones that are going to have all these adversarial attacks, that have all these people who are trying to like mess with it and not do the good thing, and see if like it's robust to that, and then maybe society can adopt it.
I think it's great, Ben. So I'm you're too humble with your idea, but yeah, I mean, definitely +1 that no government or even major corporation is going to adopt an idea just because there's a nice white paper and open source implementation of it. They want to see real world uses of it with actual self-governing communities that have gone well, and then you can kind of walk up the value chain from being like, some small DAO to, okay, now it's it's a small company, now it's a major company, now it's a small town, okay, now it's maybe a city or a nation. And we don't see much innovation in these kinds of voting systems or governance mechanisms. I mean, most of the world is still using first past or post voting, even though that's sort of a one voting mechanism, but everyone agrees is the worst one, right? Like there's controversy as to what's the right one, but it's definitely not this one. But I think, part of it is that we've not seen that many examples of other things working well. So it's this gradual process. But in terms of more like research flavored contributions that people could make, I mean, one thing I want to highlight is this idea of cooperative AI. So I really like the notion that you mentioned earlier of user-owned AI. You have your AI system be your principal, So you have a principal, it's the agent, it's acting on your behalf, it's negotiating with other AI systems. I think there's this question of, okay, well, how do you make that negotiation go well? Because you could end up these AI systems just like waging war on each other, like here's an adversarial attack, right? I mean, AI systems are like very insecure right now. And then you end up in an equilibrium that's less good than if the AI systems could have cooperated on behalf of their principals. So it's a problem we're seeing with human institutions. It's a problem we'd ideally not recreate with AI. And I think there's a lot of it to say, okay, can you make AI systems be able to better cooperate with other AI systems? Can you make provable commitments here as well? Because that's something you can actually say, here's my source code, so you can tell how I'm going to respond in this situation. So yeah, that's something I'm excited about.
Yeah, makes sense. I just want to mention, on the work with Gauntlet, one of the experiments we're going to be running a little bit later on is having AI delegate. And so can AI delegate make indeed interesting or useful decisions, and pretty much use the economy as a way to like see if people willing to delegate, pretty much stake on this AI delegate as their representative. So think of it as AI representative. You can vote for if they're making good decisions. And one of the interesting experiments there is like, do you want to have lots of different representatives, like specialized, who are like together coming to a consensus, or do you want one that is becoming like AI president? And that's, I feel I don't have an answer, and it would be an interesting experiment to see how it will end up. But yeah, I think we're out of time. So thanks a lot for coming on and kind of walking us through what you guys are working on. There's a huge kind of need for continue figuring out how we're going to approach the AI across the board, and building, as you mentioned, kind of the space out, attracting researchers, and also educating people. So thanks a lot for the work you're doing, and I'm sure we'll continue collaborating in different ways. And thanks everyone for watching. Hope this was educational, and see you next time.
Yeah.